Hello, welcome back to Intermediate Writing. Professor Kent Lee here. We're getting into case studies today, and in this lecture and the next lecture, I'm going to kind of go through some sample case studies. I will make some samples available in the LMS. Keep in mind that many of these samples, especially if they have like this little print watermark here on the side, are not to be shared outside of this class. Some of them are published research articles, like those on city branding, I'll mention later. Most of these others I got from business schools, and a lot of business schools use these case studies maybe for in-class discussion, and they tend not to share them, or at least not for free, or they make them available only to professors at other universities. So these are some reasonable examples. They are a bit incomplete because they are to be used for class discussion. So they might end abruptly and not really have much of a conclusion or much analysis and discussion because that is for maybe business schools to use them in class, and the students will be challenged to maybe get into groups and come up with some of their analyses or their solutions for these problems. But these are nonetheless really good examples. I think apart from that, I'm going to talk about at least two articles today. I've gotten from one from the Copenhagen Business School in Copenhagen, Denmark, the other one from the MIT Sloan School of Management, Business School at MIT. The first one is on sexual harassment in the university context. And it's a really nice example. It's pretty well done. This is from the University of, University in Denmark, Copenhagen Business School. So it deals with sexual harassment. And by the way, when we talk about sexual harassment can be a male harassing a female. That's probably at least 90 to well over 90% of the time it's male harassing a female, or somewhere between 90 and almost 100%. It can be a male harassing another male. It could be a female harassing a female, or a female harassing a male. That does happen. I think this article is kind of fair in that, and it has some examples of other types of harassment and some gray areas. It's written in kind of a weird font. It's a bit hard to read. Sorry about that, but it has some good information, some good examples. So let me kind of go through this. So it's called Sexual Harassment in the University Context. So it starts with the introduction about some background information. So it starts with nice specific background information. We're all familiar with the issue of sexual harassment and how it's been a big kind of topic in the news in recent years, especially with the Me Too movement. That's kind of familiar. The author doesn't insult our intelligence by pretending we don't know that. So the author begins with specific background information about controversy at Danish universities about sexual harassment. So it starts with that, how some female students have started complaining, leading to some considerable discussion and attention at Danish universities. In this context, a university officer, university official at this one university wanted to find out more about sexual harassment, especially in the student body at her university. And that kind of sets the stage for the case study. It's going to report on the research that she did. So then the next section is kind of a good background section and provides some good context. It provides a legal definition of sexual harassment from the European Union law. So that's really nice. And then it presents some good background information about the prevalence of sexual harassment in the European Union and the problem of underreporting. So that's kind of setting the stage for the study. That's the concept. Underreporting of sexual harassment, how many women encounter sexual harassment, say, in workplaces and universities, but might not report it. Now, I wish, though, that this had data more specifically about Denmark and about universities and about Danish universities. a lot of this is information about sexual harassment throughout the European Union. So it would be better to focus more on data from Denmark or from Danish universities. Nonetheless, it kind of sets up the rationale, the objective of the study, which is to learn more about sexual harassment and how many women at this university in Denmark have experienced sexual harassment. So the study is kind of part quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative meaning numbers, kind of descriptive statistics in this case, and it's a pretty good detailed survey. And then qualitative data, which would be like some case reports, some descriptions of individuals and their actual experiences for discussion. And this is to be used for discussion in a business class at this business school. So the next section starts with the quantitative data, and it's called the situation at DKU, the university. And they talk about a survey that they distributed to students, collected data from a number of respondents. And this is actually, this is kind of treating it as a problem, as a complex problem, not just black and white, but a problem sometimes with gray areas, because there are sometimes things that are sexual harassment legally, but some victims may not realize it's sexual harassment. Then there are some legitimate gray areas where people might disagree. Is this sexual harassment or not? So the survey asked respondents how they would define sexual harassment. There are questions about what different kinds of things would you consider as sexual harassment. Obviously, of course, physical acts, physical behavior, obviously sexual harassment. What about questions about someone's private life? Questions about your, sexual behavior, inappropriately staring at a person's body. Is that sexual harassment? Harmless comments, jokes about a gender, or about a person's gender, jokes about a gender in general, about women in general, or a person's gender, a particular woman's gender, and such are those sexual harassment? And a lot of times I think we would say yes. By the way, sex and gender are kind of two different things. Sex refers to biological sex, like male and female, and occasionally a person can be born with both. But the sex is biological. Gender is more like your identity. And it's a lot more complicated. Yeah, of course, it's influenced by biology, whether you're male or female. It's also influenced by your orientation. Are you, when you're, of course, born with attraction to the opposite gender, it's called cisgender attraction. Cis means opposite. Same-sex attraction, bisexual, asexual. Some people have no sexual interest, asexual. And that includes, then that's, of course, even more important than that is whether you identify as male or female, or something in between, or neither, because that's possible. Gender is a construct, is something that people and societies have constructed or created. Yes, it's influenced by biology, but also your own feelings. You feel like you're a woman, feel like a man. Do you really strongly identify with your biological sex or not? That can be influenced by a lot of factors: social factors, genetic, physical, biological factors, social, psychological, personal factors. Even the biological influences are complicated because, you can have like XY chromosomes, but a chromosome has thousands and thousands of genes which can go different ways, and so people can have, there are multiple identities possible, and we don't exactly know yet how many. It's complicated, but still, to simplify things, studies like this will mainly focus on male and female genders. That also does mention, of course, gay and lesbian people and whether they are victims of harassment. So anyway, the first part of the survey is questions about how you define harassment. The next section of the survey consists of some questions about those gray areas. What are boundaries? So Yeah, obviously some behaviors are obviously harassment. But what about, okay, staring at a person's body in class? Is that harassment? And actually, a lot of people, majority of the people said yes here. Uh, Jokes about a person's gender, is that harassment? Oftentimes, yeah. Uh, According to the survey takers. If it's a compliment, is that harassment? And most people here tended to say no. But jokes about a person's gender or about a opposite gender can often be harassment, according to the respondents. Then the last section of the survey was questions about experiences with sexual harassment, where 41% of the students said that they encountered some kind of harassment of different kinds. And the end of this paper ends with an appendix with kind of more detailed numerical data. So there is the prose or paragraph description of the results of the surveys, and then more data is given at the end of the paper, the appendix. Then there's a qualitative section where several people's experiences are described in detail. And this is actually pretty helpful. And this is used probably for use in a business class where students could discuss, is this harassment? And some of these cases obviously are, some are kind of gray areas, but students will discuss, okay, is this harassment or not? The first one is a party incident where a woman experiences sexist and unwelcome comments about her body, obviously harassment. Second section is about an attempt by the university to promote a training business leadership training course for women on their Facebook page, and they got a lot of negative or critical comments from men. This sounds kind of sexist. Is this harassment? You would probably say yes. Third one, the thesis defense. A female student is defending her master's thesis, and one of the professors says something like calling her sweetheart. Very old-fashioned, and this would be very unprofessional. It's something like this. I mean, I grew up in Texas, and not maybe so much where I live, but I have heard, like old people referring to a woman as honey or sweetheart. It's very old-fashioned. Maybe they don't intend it in a bad way, but it is maybe it's not. You can debate whether it's harassment, but it's at least insensitive and unprofessional. And God, I hope you don't do this if you ever are working in a company or in a school. A fourth example is a female teacher who's teaching a class, I think, about marketing and merchandise, and she talks about examples of cars and persons and makes kind of really lame, dumb jokes about, okay, cars, I know you guys will like this, ladies, this might be boring for you. She keeps making these kinds of comments about the different kind of products she's talking about in her class. I'm a guy that I don't care about cars. I don't care about computers. I love computers, yeah. Computer components, operating systems. Cars, who cares? Yeah, so she keeps making these comments, and then instructions on an exam. She says things like, ladies, don't be shy in the instructions, and men, don't be too aggressive, and students complain about this. Maybe one comment is sort of annoying, but this is like repetitive. This is something she keeps doing week after week, and gets really annoying. She is, in a very unprofessional and childish way, making silly jokes, unprofessional comments about gender roles and such. And then next we have, I think, yes, a case of actually, so here's a guy in an uncomfortable situation where he's like at a party, social events, and a woman keeps coming onto him, keeps pressuring him, trying to flirt with him, and keeps insisting that he take her home and stuff like that. And you might not think, well, for a woman to do that to a guy, is it okay? Well, from the guy's perspective, it's probably harassment. And yes, especially because he has, he's being maybe targeted by a group of women because he's in a certain leadership position, and that makes it kind of even more of problematic situation. And the last one, a woman who is getting unwanted attention from a guy and unwanted hugging and things like that. Yeah, that's harassment. So a couple of these cases are gray areas, and they're maybe good for discussion and debate in class. Now, it kind of it ends with a lot of data tables, which is nice, and in the conclusion is kind of abrupt and vague. It's simply our desire is that women will be heard more and we will be taken more seriously, and we want to contribute to this discussion and debate on harassment. So that's it. It's more of an analysis of the situation, which is fine, I think, for a case study. It isn't presenting solutions, and that's fine. A purely analytical case study is fine. I think more of a conclusion section would be nice, where it kind of says more about, okay, this is the status of harassment and awareness of harassment at this university or in the student body. Something a little bit more like that would have been good here. And finally, we have the references. So this does cite references. It cites a lot of data about the situation of harassment and such, especially in the background, the context. This is an APA format, sort of APA format. That's the format that's more often used in psychology and education, which might look a little odd to you. It's a little different, maybe, than what some of you are used to. But this is a nice paper. It ends kind of abruptly, and it is maybe used more for discussion, class discussion, generating class discussions and debates in a business class at a university. It's a nice analytical piece, I think. Does a good job of providing data and some analysis. I think a bit more detailed analysis or discussion of the results would have been good here, though. The second example is from MIT, the MIT School of Management, Sloan School of Management, and it's about Sony's battle for video game supremacy. So, in the past couple of decades, video game consoles, devices, and along with kind of games that are made for them, the main competitors have been Sony's PlayStation, Microsoft's Xbox, and Nintendo Wii. This has a lot of good background. I think it doesn't have enough analysis, especially of what was then the current situation. This is from 2011, so it is a bit old, a bit dated. So it goes into the background of Sony's competition with other companies for supremacy in different aspects of the video game market and video products. Some of it's not so relevant. Talks about the old videotape wars from the 1980s, the ancient videotapes, Sony's Betamax standard, which lost out to the VHS standard, and then DVD and Blu-rays. Okay, kind of nice for context, but I think it spends a bit much time on that. And then goes to a pretty detailed discussion of the history of the market for video game consoles. The Sony versus Microsoft versus Nintendo. So there's a very detailed discussion that spans a number of pages of Sony entering the console market in the 90s and taking on Nintendo, and Microsoft entering later on. And so there's a good deal of competition. So it talks about the development of the market in the 1990s and the early 2000s. It mentions some challenges competing with Microsoft, and then especially with the Xbox coming in 2005, competition really heated up, where Sony and Nintendo and Microsoft Xbox were all competing with each other. Goes through all of these details, goes to some challenges, differentiation of the market in the 2000s, and then particularly it's called Public Backlash on page 15. So in in the later 90s, as video game technology started to improve, it was easier to depict violence and violent video games on screen. And Sony's PlayStation in particular created some successful but violent games that faced a lot of public controversy and scrutiny. Some particularly violent shooting games, for example, were mentioned in connection with some famous shooting cases and created a lot of public attention. So you might have heard stories in the news about a psychology study showing that playing video games contributes to violence. As a person who has studied some psychology, research psychology, I can tell you that there are problems with those studies, and you can go online and find people debunking and criticizing those studies. You could do a study in a psychology lab with somebody playing violent video games and seeing like temporary changes in their behavior, increases in aggressive hormone levels, and temporary changes in their attitudes. It doesn't translate to, there's no evidence, no psychological evidence that translates to their behavior, after playing the game, long-term behavior. There isn't really any evidence for that. In general, it's maybe not good for young kids to play really violent video games. But on the other hand, there isn't really clear scientific evidence that this contributes to actual violent behavior. Nonetheless, there was a lot of public criticism, an attempt to create some kind of standards or rating systems, which were then criticized for not being very effective. Then it kind of transitions back to the current situation where Microsoft was just releasing a new Xbox and Sony was releasing a new PlayStation model. And it ends very abruptly with mentioning that the Xbox was outselling, or the PlayStation was kind of outselling the Xbox a little bit, but they were still kind of close. And that's it. It's a very abrupt ending. There is no analysis of why. So it's good in terms of the background and the context provided here. It's kind of lacking in terms of analysis. So, for example, specific reasons. Why, for example, have the PlayStation and Xbox done well in the marketplace in recent years? You need some analysis, some discussion of cause and effect. So analysis, for example, would be cause and effect. The word analysis literally means to break things apart. To break things apart, causes and effects. What were the causes or the reasons and the effects? If the PlayStation is doing a little bit better than Xbox, according to these sales figures, okay, why? You need to go into specific reasons. If the purpose of this is just analysis, and not to propose any, suggestions or solutions to the future, that's fine, but there should be some analysis here. So, for example, probably more detailed discussion of the sales figures and profits of the companies, of these two companies. Information from consumers, consumer reactions. How do consumers feel about these two consoles and how well games play on these two competing products? You would need to discuss at least some specific technical details, the advantages of these two consoles in terms of how well they perform, how well they work smoothly without breaking down, connection to the internet, connection with other players online. Are they easy to set up and install and maintain? Availability of games to play on them. Are the games readily? Is there a good selection of games for different audiences, for different segments of the market? Are they affordable? What we call the GUI, graphical user interface, like how well the games in the interface, how users interface with the product, and the user experience, user interface, UI, and user experience. Do users feel like they have a good experience? Is it easy to figure out the system, to navigate, to get around? Is the user interface well designed? Does it provide a good user experience? Like the users feel like this is a really good game experience, and it's not too hard to like set things up and to change your game settings and to start playing is the user interface and user experience satisfactory? Those are some questions that would need to be discussed. Why is the PlayStation doing well? Why is the Xbox doing well? What is it that explains their performance in the market? You would need some analysis. And at the end, there are a lot of like data tables and such. There's not much explanation, I think, in the text. In terms of sources, there are a lot of sources cited, particularly from business news sources, using the Chicago long footnote format. So you see footnotes, and at the bottom, full information is given in the footnotes. You probably can't see it here on the video. You don't need a works cited or references at the end because the long footnote style is used where the full information about the source is given at the footnote at the bottom of the page. That's an okay example. It's mainly good in terms of the background information and detailed discussion of the company's performance. It's really short on analysis. Maybe that would be a task. Maybe business students would read this and they would be then given the task of analyzing this stuff. Who knows? So your paper, it could be on, say, a lot of different topics: companies, organizations, schools, educational institutions, your university department, and such. It could be specifically analysis. If your purpose is just analysis and analyzing a situation, a case, that's fine. As long as you make that clear in your introduction throughout the paper, your purpose is to analyze something. Analyze maybe why. Why did this company do well in this market? Why did they not do well? Why did they grow? Why did they fail? And such. You would need to show specific cause and effect. Talk about specific factors and the effect they probably had, and give reasons for that. If this company's strategy led to this good result, okay, explain why. Maybe compare it with other companies and other case studies. Provide data and evidence for your claims, in other words. Properly cite sources for that when necessary. So your paper could be analytical, it could be a problem solution. So let me give an example of maybe a problem solution. And that at least one or two students have done in this course this year and last year have done a paper related to city branding. Interesting topic. So that's like a city's brand image. It includes how the city promotes itself, or the kind of the wider term is destination branding, destination marketing, promoting a destination, like for tourists, for business people, for come visit us, or come move here, or come do business here, set up your company here, or come vacation here. So city branding, or could be city, could be a whole region, a province, and such. If you were doing this, well, okay, you can compare Seoul and Busan, and maybe you look at what Seoul has done. So Seoul has done a lot in the past. More recently, they've done some weird stuff. So sometimes part of the branding is a slogan that's used in advertising. What is Seoul's slogan now for advertising? I Seoul you. And any English speaker would look at that and go, what the heck does that mean? That's like a word salad. That is stupid. It makes no sense. I Seoul you. I mean, who in the world came up with that? How much alcohol were they drinking when they decided on that as a logo as a city logo for Seoul? It just says that we have no idea how to make comprehensible logos. It says maybe we're drunk. I don't know what that says. I Seoul you. It makes no sense. So obviously it doesn't work. It doesn't resonate with other people outside of Korea. That would make no sense. It doesn't look professional. It looks silly. So I don't think Busan really. I don't know what Busan is doing now in terms of city branding, but you could look at their past efforts at city branding. particularly relying on cultural events like the Busan International Film Festival and its fame as sort of a sea trading port, harbor, sea commerce, and such. But what has it done? What does it need to do? I mean, if it wants to improve, if it wants to attract more people, more visitors, what does Busan need to do? So maybe look at other cities, especially in Korea, what cities have done well or what they've not done well, and then look at what Busan is doing or not doing. What do they need to do? What do they need to do better? What do they need to improve? So you could analyze the current situation, the current needs. Oh, Busan needs to do a lot more. It's not doing much, especially with a possible World Expo coming here in about 9 years, 8 years almost. What does Busan need to do to improve its image, to improve its brand image? That could be a good problem solution paper if any of you are interested. So your paper could be purely analytical, it could be problem solution, it could be more evaluative or critical, critiquing something. So you could look at what a company did, how successful was their strategy, what should they have done differently. So you could critique and evaluate something that a company did or an organization did, or you could critique or evaluate maybe a particular university, like your university, some aspect. Be specific. You could, like how well this university is attracting foreign students, how well this university English department is doing. You could critique your own department as long as it's a good, solid analysis with real data. You need real data, solid data. You could critique an educational program, a university department, universities, a particular aspect of a university, a company's marketing strategy, a particular organization's program, particular community service program, how well it was done, how it worked, was it effective, things like that. Those are different possibilities you can do. So your paper could be more analytical, it could be more problem solution, where you analyze the problem, but then talk about solutions and explain why these solutions should work. When you propose solutions, give specific solutions and talk about why they would work. Maybe cite other studies or other cases where it worked or didn't work. It could be more evaluative and critical, looking at what some organization or entity did in the past. Those are some possibilities for how you would approach your final paper. In the next video, I'll look more at a couple more case studies on different topics, business and otherwise, and talk more about some ideas for your paper. So, until the next video, see you soon. Goodbye.